2005, 6.8 million Salvadorans live in El Salvador, and approximately 2.6 million live in the US, according to the Salvadoran government. If these numbers are correct, then about 1/3 of the Salvadoran population lives right here in the US. Salvadorans in El Salvador are very cognizant of how necessary remittances are to the everyday functioning of the economy. So this is just outside the San Salvador airport. It's a monument that was finished last year. There's like a little park, and this was actually made by one of El Salvador's most famous artists. And it says, welcome brother, and in Spanish that can mean brother and sister, so welcome home. Remittances have become such a part of family structure. Migration has become such a part of family structure that you can actually see it now kind of honored in the built environment. And then there's so many stories that you can hear about of small towns that had no electricity, that had no libraries, and that migrants here in the U.S. got together and said, you know what, we're tired of it. The government over there doesn't pay attention to us. And so Intipuca is an example of one town that got all of its roads paved and got all of its, or most of its electrical capacity from migrants in the U.S. And it's interesting, and here they actually kind of honor where their migrants live, and in their case it's Washington, Virginia, and Maryland. And so that's what you see when you drive into that town. With all this money coming into El Salvador and improving people's lives, what could be wrong with this picture? Well, for one, this is not just an effortless flow of money. Remittances come from people for whom it has been economically unviable to stay in El Salvador and provide for themselves or family members. Since 1990, El Salvador has seen an average of 185,000 people leave each year. Remember, that's an astronomically high number for a country the size of El Salvador. Imagine that if we heard that news coming from Massachusetts, 185,000 people leaving each year. So the sheer magnitude of that number should serve as a red flag warning that something is wrong with the Salvadoran economy. Well, even the most conservative economists agree that the Salvadoran economy is completely unsustainable. In 2008, $3.8 billion worth of remittances made up 17% of the GDP. 79% of remittances were used on basic necessities such as food, clothing, and electrical bills. El Salvador actually now consumes more than it produces. It's $102.40 for every $100 it produces. So essentially it has now gone into, it's become an import economy, even though that's never what elected officials, it was never in the official plans. All right, so here we go. Neoliberalism, I just wanted to quickly define it. It's an economic philosophy based on the notion that optimal economic outcomes are reached through minimal government participation in the economy. The idea is that the free market will make the best choices in regards to production and distribution of resources. So neoliberalism is also a set of policies designed to put this theory into practice. So in the 1990s, Reagan and Thatcher popularized neoliberalism, but not only as an ideology. Neoliberalism in practice was brought to many developing countries via international finance institutions. So let me just show you what neoliberalism in El Salvador looks like. In El Salvador, it has taken on the shape of increased privatization, liberalization of state activities, free trade, and dollarization. In 1989, ex-Salvadoran President Alfredo Cristiani began a process of liberalization that eliminated all forms of government considered inefficient. The most profound change was the privatization of the banks, and they had been nationalized in the late 70s. So his administration also cut price controls, which they had the function of protecting the domestically produced goods. He cut food subsidies and eliminated trade tariffs, and again, that kind of supported and Thank you. A flood of imports. So let me move on. So, you know, part of my process, I've shared with you what my original question was, which was like, what is happening if more and more remittances are going to the country? How is it that people seem to be getting poorer and that they need to leave in greater and greater numbers? And part of that question, even though I was looking at El Salvador in the post-1989 era, and El Salvador had a civil war that went from 1981 to 1992, I still had to go into the past, and this is a digital mural by Judith Baca. She teaches at UCLA, and there's a lot of symbols here that I won't begin to deconstruct, but it tells the history of Central American people and the struggles that they've seen. And so I put this up here to kind of represent what I learned in this process, which is the struggle that Salvadorans faced in the post-1989 era is actually the same struggle that we've been facing in the last 100 years. It's a class struggle. It's a struggle of a very elite few against the masses. Except now it's taken on. It's manifesting as economic violence. So this is the vicious cycle that I came up with. This is how I eventually came to understand the phenomena that's taking over El Salvador, and that's that, you know, the basis of this need to migrate. We're not talking about free will here. It's this social exclusion, and I should give you a quick definition of it. Well, anyway, social exclusion. It's basically policies, both informal and formal, that systematically exclude people from the benefits of their society or economy. That brings them to the decision where, I mean, they're essentially displaced. It's a whole migrant class. And then people, as part of a transnational strategy for survival, send money home. And again, we're not talking about gifts sent across seas. We're talking about families figuring out a way to survive. And now here's the big irony, and that's what I really want to call your attention to, is that, you know, when we're talking about this oligarchy that has refused time and time again, even through bloody battles, to hand over even just a little bit of power, you know, with this flow of remittances coming in, there's no reason to change economic policy. And so it's actually, it's basically not, no one's having to review it. And as Gilda put so well one day, she said, so we're basically talking about poor people sending money to poor people, and that's essentially what that is. I wanted to just share a mural with you. I mean, you know, speaking of graffiti, this is what this piece of art / graffiti says. Economic violence towards women expresses itself through poverty dollarization. El Salvador adopted the dollar in 2001. Informal work, firing pregnant women, age discrimination. This is an artist in the Bay Area, actually, a Salvadoran artist. And these are two different pieces of his. And right here it says, cheap labor, made in El Salvador, and wanted, right? And then this is unwanted, made in the USA. So he's making a commentary, too, on the young people that are born in El Salvador. Maybe they're brought here when they're 3. And so we're talking about a migration and displacement that goes both ways. You know, so if you turn into a gang member and you're deported at 14, there's a huge population of youth that end up in El Salvador that been there, you know, maybe when they were a year old, and they don't even speak Spanish. So it's like unwanted, wanted, and yet everyone is considered illegal. So it just to wrap things up, you know, economists and big international finance institutions are currently trying to harness the power of remittances. And, you know, it's just, I wish you guys could see some of these publications and the way they talk about the movement of migrants, as if there's someone waiting for them, as if they don't have to cross a desert, as if there's any guarantee they're going to make it. And so I think it's time for scholars and analysts like myself who are willing to look at the human costs of migration and what the actual roots of the injustice are. You know, I mean, people, this is actually Mexico City, people are cognizant of how interrelated our economies are. This is a demonstration in Mexico City, and they're saying, Obama, keep your promise, and kind of like, you know, stick with it, migrants, like we're here, we're in Mexico City, but we see how our paths our sustainability is related. Very last thing, so where do we go from here? I mean, there's, you know, never a really easy answer for this question. I mean, the Salvadoran people have tried in the past, and that's, you know, that's basically, we won't go into the Civil War, but that's basically the structure of society was what the Civil War was about, and they lost. So what I would like to see is a good discourse where we tell the narrative of what's going on. Western Union, they say that like of all the money that goes between migrants in the world, like through Western Union, or I mean, of all migrant money, Western Union processes $1 out of every $5. I mean, we're talking worldwide. So when you drive through certain parts of LA where there's a lot of Mexican or Central American immigrants, you're going to see these posters that have like a smiling grandma and a granddaughter. And I mean, this is playing on the emotions of a whole class of people here in LA, and we all know them, right? You know, that have someone in mind as they're driving around LA. You know, they've left El Salvador so that they could put their daughter through school. So what I would like to see is, you know, how can we start to have a discussion, a different narrative than the one that Western Union would like us to tell, because remember, this is a big business. The business of migration, displacement, and remittances, some people are hurting from it and some people are benefiting. So thank you, and I just wanted to give a quick little thank you to basically my committee. I mean, it was a transnational affair. I have the wonderful Gilda Haas here, Hillary Booker, who unfortunately was not here today. She was also my mentor for some time. And then Carlos, he's in Buenos Aires, and he was my academic advisor, and he's Salvadoran but grew up in Canada. So it's lovely how this all came together. And thank you for your
questions?
Yeah. Julia, do you think that the discourse, I mean, I think we have a different visioning of what immigration looks like being in California, right, but especially Southern California. But I think when you say where do we go from here, we have never had an honest discussion of immigration in this country.
Definitely.
And who is doing, you know, everyone always says they're taking jobs from us. But how many white people do I see up in Fresno trying to get a job?
Right.
You know, trying to do the day labor, trying to do the dangerous and low-paying jobs of the farm workers that we rely on in our food system.
Right.
I mean, I think really one of the steps that we need to have, and I want to see if you agree, is that we have to have an honest discourse in this country of what immigrants do for us. And how we kick them to the curb all the time when we have these conversations. Like, we don't need those immigrants in our daily lives.
Right. I mean, it's the real irony that, you know, our economy in a really real way needs this cheap labor force. I mean, that's why I included that art piece, because it's like, you know, it's not a conspiracy theory. It's just that at the high levels, I mean, there's awareness that we need this. That it's part of our society, and yet the discussion around immigration is just so far from what, I mean, there's not even an understanding of what, you know, immigration means. Mm-hmm. And I think, you know, one thing I discussed in my thesis was that there's this whole better life narrative. Mm-hmm. And it's not that that's not true, you know, everyone wants a better life, but I mean, we're talking about a situation where people are economic refugees, and you know, as Americans, we're